Hello everybody, it's Nick here with Nick Tolman Music, and today we are going to continue our beginner guitar lesson series using Mel Bay's Modern Guitar Method, Grade 1. Today's lesson we'll be looking at page 44. There's one exercise on page 44, which is a duet. I'll go ahead and play both parts for you so you can see what they sound like and practice along with them. I'll also put those parts together so you can hear what the duet sounds like with both parts together. And lastly, there's a discussion about tone, which is a great topic to talk about, and we'll kind of dive into that just a little bit today. But let's go ahead and start with our first exercise, which is Maytime. So here is part 1 at 72 on the metronome, Maytime. 1, 2, 3, 1, ready, and... Alright, so there it is. That is part 1 at 72. There's really not a lot to it. There is one funny little thing that happens in the second line, starting on the first measure. Sorry, got an itch on my nose. First line, second measure, we have... And then we've got that B, and D thing. Now, if you play it with your first and second finger like we kind of normally have been doing, it's going to require a shift. And then what I kind of like to do on the way back is on the third measure, play that first D with my first finger, shift, play the C sharp with my first finger, play the D with my second finger, and then open E and then shift the rest of the way. So that third measure would look like this. Rather than having a huge shift up front, you just do a couple small shifts to make it smoother. Might be something to try. Now your other option would be to just play the D with your third finger and the B with your fourth finger. They would require no shift, so... So in that second measure, if you choose that route, it might take a minute to get used to that feeling because we haven't done that fingering for that combination of notes much in this, but that option would require no shifting. So. Okay, all right, so that's it. That's Maytime part 1 at 72. Let's go ahead and try part 2. So here's part 2 at 72 on the metronome. 1, 2, 3, 1, ready, and... And there we have it. So that is Maytime Part 2 at 72 on the metronome. This one, there are a couple things that we could discuss. First off is there are obviously chords that are being used, but this might be the first exercise that it doesn't really label them at all. So usually when there are clearly chords that we're going to be using, it kind of labels those above and gives you what's happening there, and it's not. So you can obviously figure it out by looking at what notes are being played. But we'll kind of walk through it a little bit. So that first measure is just a G chord. And then we move into a D7 chord. Okay, because we've got that A, C, and F sharp. Clearly D7. And then we've got this eighth note line. Okay, that's all individual notes. There's not really a chord shape that's going to help you with that. You just... And then you're back to a G chord. D7 chord. Okay, and then that repeats. Now moving down into the second line, we have this F sharp, eighth note line thing. And then in that second measure, it's a G chord, right? Now I would recommend playing that high G with your third finger or second or, you know, whatever, but not your fourth finger like you would normally play a G chord. Because right after that, you're going to need that fourth finger to play that F sharp down here, right? So if you play the G with your fourth finger, that's going to be an awkward shift. So I would, in the second measure, play that high G with your third finger. Then, right? So I'll show you that again. So this is the second measure of the second line. Okay, so that's the idea. So don't use your fourth finger for that high G. That way your fourth finger can be ready to be used for that low F sharp, that mid-range F sharp. Then in the fifth measure, we've got a G chord again, another D7 chord, and then an eighth note line. And that's that. All right, so here's what the two parts sound like together. 1, 2, 3, 1, ready, and... All right, so let's go ahead and try Maytime at 120 on the metronome. Here we go. Here is part 1 at 120. 1, 2, 3, 1, ready, and... All right, so there's part 1 at 120. Let's go ahead and hear part 2 at the same tempo. 1, 2, 3, 1, ready, and... And there it is. So that's part 2 of Maytime at 120. Let's hear what they sound like together. 1, 2, 3, 1, ready, and... Okay, so let's have a little discussion here about tone. So tone is a really important concept. To me, tone is basically like the sound that you're making or the quality of sound that you are making, right? I can play the same note and have multiple different tones that take place, okay? And that can happen by a variety of things. Down here it says that tone has 4 characteristics. It says pitch, duration, dynamics, and timbre. Now, I would also add, it's very similar to pitch, but I would also probably add intonation, which means like how much the note is in tune can absolutely apply to it and is very related to pitch, but maybe different if we're thinking about it in that way. But let's talk about it a little bit. So how do we produce a good tone, or what are some options that we have to produce different kinds of tone? When we talk about pitch, that's kind of the first thing, is you're talking about exactly what note are you playing. Now, on the guitar, you have a lot of different options. For instance, if I play the note E, okay, so here is the note E. Now, if I play it as an open string, open high E string, there is a certain tone that takes place when I play it there, right? Now if I play that same note here, but on the 5th fret of the 2nd string, the tone is ever so slightly different, right? And that's something to be aware of, is that with the guitar you can play the same note in a lot of different places, and sometimes the tone is going to be different, right? That's going to sound a little bit different than if I play the note here, right? Which is going to sound different than if I play it here. Right? Which is going to sound different than if I play it here. And that's very noticeable. So if I play that high E right here, 19th fret on the 5th string, it's going to sound very different than if I play an open high E string. I'll demonstrate. Right? So that note up here on the 19th fret is a much kind of rounder, softer sound, right? Versus, which is a very bright, resonant type sound. Okay? So that's just something to be aware of. Where you play, whatever pitch you play, where you play it on the guitar may produce a different tone. Okay? That's a good example of the difference between tones on different places on the fretboard. Now, when it talks about duration, that can also kind of be played into tone, and what that's kind of referring to is, like if I play a note in the exercise that we just played up on top, I'm looking at the part 1 on the second line, right? Now, I can play those notes all kind of connected like I did. Every note kind of just runs to the next note. Da 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 da. Do 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 do. Which is going to sound different than if I play. Right? It's a different tone. To me, duration is less about tone and more about like style. Okay? But you can maybe think of it in that way. All right? Now, dynamics definitely plays into it, right? So if I play that very soft, like pianissimo, like as quiet as I can, versus if I, right? Not only is it louder, but it's going to have a brighter sound then. So the dynamics can certainly play into your tone. And then timbre really is essentially just the quality of sound. If you think of like the human voice, right? You can have one person sing a line of music and another person sing the same exact notes, same exact words, and it's going to sound totally different. It's because every human voice is slightly different, right? When we talk about timbre, there are a lot of different things that can play into that on guitar. One can be the guitar that you're playing. If I have a guitar with like a spruce top versus like a guitar that's like solid mahogany, you know, it's going to sound different from each other. The way the guitar is built, the quality of the guitar is going to play into the timbre, the sound that that instrument makes. Okay, but there are other things as well, so I'll kind of demonstrate. So one would be like, I'm using that same line. Now if I pick that really close back here next to the bridge or the saddle, whoa, you hear how bright that is? Versus if I pick right here where kind of my kind of standard spot would be, like really close to the bottom of the sound hole. Is where it sounds, but what if I pick up here toward the top of the sound hole? Right? That's going to play into it a lot. Your sound, your timbre is different depending on where you are picking. Okay? Not only that, but how you pick, right? So what's the angle of your pick? Are you playing very flat? If you're playing really flat and back toward the bridge, that's super bright. If I play with my pick more angled, that's going to make a softer, darker sound. If I combine that with playing a little bit more over the sound hole or toward the closer to the neck, I can get a much darker, softer sound. Okay, so all of that kind of plays into timbre on the instrument. Now, I mentioned intonation. The beginning of intonation is your guitar in tune, right? The other part is that sometimes, especially if you're playing with a lot of tension, you can actually pull notes out of tune without even realizing it, right? If I reach for a G chord and I have a lot of tension and I'm like really stretching for it because doing something funny with my arm, I can actually bend strings out and the guitar is not quite in tune. It's not as resonant as it could be. So you want to make sure that you're playing with your fingers, you know, just pushing the strings down, not bending them at all, to get the most in-tune sound when you play. Now, if you're playing an electric guitar, there is a whole nother realm of diving into tone. Because with an electric guitar, there's a lot of other factors. Not only do you have your guitar and your technique and what you're doing with your hands and fingers, but you also have an amplifier. And every amplifier is going to sound a little bit different. You also have a various set of effects that you might be using, whether you have those built into your amplifier, or whether you have different pedals, or you have a single pedal with a lot of different effects. There's a whole world of possibilities for tone, and that's beyond the scope of this lesson today, but if you are playing an electric guitar and you're interested in tone, start diving into that a little bit and seeing what is out there, what kind of sounds can you make, what kind of tone do you want on your instrument for whatever type of music you're playing. And I guarantee you will find lots of information. So anyways, that's a quick discussion about tone. Hope you enjoyed today's lesson. If you have any questions or comments or concerns, please leave them in the comments below. I'd be more than happy to help you with those as you're moving through your journey on guitar. If you haven't yet subscribed, please do. Check out my website at www.nicktolmanmusic.com for extra exercises and resources there to help you. Also, check me out on Facebook at Nick Tolman Music, and I'd love to connect with you there as well. So, thank you again. We'll see you next time.